Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn. Today for you I have a Bjorn's Mighty Thoughts video. Going to be talking a bit about a touchy subject, and it is definitely a touchy subject all the way around. What I'm going to be discussing is the whole deal with mass shootings. The facts, the realities, I'm not going to give hard numbers, but a lot of the numbers that you can find, you can actually get from the DOJ, the FBI. There's a lot of really good resources out there to find these numbers. And I'm just going to talk from a general standpoint. I'm also going to talk about things that need to be done for us to prevent this from happening again. We all acknowledge that the shooting that happened in Texas is very unfortunate, and it definitely could have 100% been prevented. And it's just an unfortunate event, and my condolences go out to the family members who had lost children, as well as other loved ones, as 2 adults were also killed in that shooting. But let's be honest, all this could have been prevented. Let me start with lifting the veil, if you will. So that way you can see my face. I'm talking directly to you, the viewer, right now, and you're looking at me. And obviously you can weigh in. There's a comment section down below, and you can either agree or disagree. I don't care either way. I'm going to weigh in on what I know to be fact. And this is through over the years. I mean, I've grown up with firearms. So pretty much, firearms is my religion almost. Not quite, but I've dealt with firearms my whole life, as far as I can remember. And, my children are the same way. They've been born and raised in a house with firearms as well. That being said, the real situation is let's start with the fact that people are going out there, they're blaming the AR-15s. The left is going out there and blaming the AR-15s, to be specific. And let's be honest here, it's not the AR-15s. Most of the violent crime committed, including school shootings and mass shootings, are actually committed with a handgun. They're not committed with a assault rifle type weapon, let alone even a majority of the weapons, majority of the firearms that are long type firearms, such as rifles, shotguns, etc., are done with just that. They're done with hunting rifles, what most would consider a hunting rifle, what most would consider a shotgun or hunting type shotgun. They're not typically done with tactical style weapons, the AR-15 or the AK-47, or even other, type weapons of that type, the MP5, or there's the Scorpion Evo you can buy on the market now. There's a lot of different civilian type weapons that you can buy that are tactical type weapons, or what they would consider tactical type weapons. And let's be honest here, they are. I'm going to call it what it is. The AR-15 is a tactical type weapon. I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, it's a sporting arm. No, it's a tactical gun. It's meant to either A, fight a war, B, defend yourself. But they're also great to have fun out at the range. I love to take my AR-15 out at the range and just have fun with it. And in some limited fashion, I've even actually used my AR-15 for hunting. So for people who go, oh, it's not a hunting gun, you can actually hunt with AR-15s. And that being said, AR-15 platform is chambered in multiple rounds. Everything from .308, 5.56, 223, well, 223 and 5.56 are generally the same in most regards. 9mm, 22 long rifle. 22 long rifle is considered by many a hunting cartridge, but you can get it for a tactical rifle. You see my point? And in my state, we do have coyote problems in my state. They're not horrendously bad as in some other states, but coyote is not heavily regulated in my state. So in my state, actually, you can, in limited fashion during certain seasons, hunt coyote with an AR-15, which 5.56 or 223 is considered a varmint cartridge. At least most people acknowledge that 223 Remington is a varmint rifle cartridge. That being said, like I said, 223 and 5.56 in general terms is the same cartridge. Now 5.56, well, there's some differences in 5.56, and it tends to do with barrel pressure, how hot the load is, etc. So there is differences, but in general terms, it's the same cartridge. And actually, 5.56 is very close to 22. Yeah, actually, I compared it when I was up at hunting camp with my father-in-law. He had his 22 Hornet. And, of course, I had my AR-15, and I compared the two rounds. And while the AR-15 round, the 5.56, was a longer, obviously more powerful casing, the bullet, it looked like I could have actually took the bullet out of his casing and put it in my casing. Now, that would not have worked because actually the 5.56 is slightly larger, but the difference between the two round sizes is so slight that you'd actually need a micrometer to see it. You wouldn't be able to, you can't see the difference between with the naked eye, although you can see differences in the bullet shape itself as 5.56 comes to a more of a spear point than the 22 Hornet does. Grain weights are actually very similar as well. I fire a 62 grain bullet out of my 5.56 rifle, and I believe his was actually a 70 grain. So actually his bullet was heavier than mine, even though it was a larger caliber. I could be mistaken though on the bullet weight. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just trying to put some myths out there now about mass shootings, what type of weapons are used in mass shootings. And typically, more often than not, it is a handgun type weapon. And actually, more often than not, from what I've seen, it's actually done with a Glock. Not an AR-15 at all. Now, that being said, when you look at violent crime, the mass majority of violent crime is actually committed with some type of handheld weapon along the lines of a hammer, baseball bat, or a knife. So even when you start looking at violent crime, guns really aren't actually as high up as a lot of people want to imagine. There's a lot of myths that makes it seem like guns are the number one killer in the United States, and it's not even close. It's something like number 12. Like number one, if I recall, is heart disease. Number 2 is cancer. Number 3 is diabetes. I mean, the list just keeps going on and on and on. And the next thing I want to cover is the actual information of school shootings. There's a lot of information about school shootings out there. And here's kind of where the issue gets kind of weird. So there's actually a lot of firearm related stuff that does happen on school property, which in my opinion, any number realistically is a high number. Anything more than 5 is a high number, because there are some schools out there with rifle teams, and mistakes do happen. Accidental discharges do happen. It's not often, but it does happen. And that needs to be taken into consideration when you're looking at the numbers of school shootings from the DOJ. And when you look at previous years, there actually is breakdowns of that. And if you go looking through the breakdowns, you'll actually see that a mass majority of school shootings that take place is actually suicide. And was not a mass shooting whatsoever. It was one person who unfortunately committed suicide actually on school grounds when the schools weren't open. That needs to be taken into consideration too. The next thing that also needs to be taken into consideration, that a majority of things that happens on schools that is firearm related is actually crimes that had taken place on school property way after school hours. You know, such as, I don't know, a cop tried to stop someone, a perpetrator, and the perpetrator drew a firearm and shot at the cop. That becomes a firearm crime that happened on school property at a school, even though it actually wasn't in the school. And it wasn't during a time where actually anyone would have been hurt because there was no one in the school. That actually happens quite often, especially in major cities such as Chicago, where you basically can't own a gun. So that needs to be put out there too. The next thing that needs to be put out there about the whole school shooting thing and just mass shootings in general, people need to sit there and think about where these mass shootings are happening. They are happening in places that are gun-free zones. There was a recruitment station just a couple years ago where a mass shooting had taken place. There was, if I recall, there was 5 people shot, 2 were killed. That was pretty much everybody that was there at the recruitment center. That recruitment center was a gun-free zone, even though it was a military establishment. Schools, it happens a lot more often than it should at schools. I think we're all in agreement on that. Once again, schools are gun-free zones. Where do you not hear about mass shootings? Government buildings, courthouses, banks, even hospitals. And that's because all those establishments has armed security guards. So a way to actually prevent, I would argue, a way to prevent mass shootings, stop having gun-free zones. Allow teachers, faculty, whatever, to be able to carry firearms. Even if they have to go through some kind of course and be certified to carry, I'm all for it. Actually, I've been arguing for that since Sandy Hook happened, that we need to start letting, schools have armed security as well as the teachers need to be armed. Because I tell you what, with the situation with Texas, okay, the shooter started outside, and I'm not going to say his name because I'm not going to make him any more famous than he needs to be, than he already is. He shouldn't be famous at all. And the media has made him famous, which I'll get into here in a bit. But essentially, the shooter started outside at a playground, came into the school. The school had an unlocked door, which it wasn't supposed to. Schools had established in Sandy Hook that the school doors need to be locked from the outside so people can't get in. They have to be buzzed into the school. I know because my children go to school, and I've had to pick them up from the school. And every time I've had to do that, I've had to walk up to the main office and get buzzed in. And then I could not leave the main office. So, and I had to state what I was there for and who my child was. So that needs to be, my school definitely, the schools in my area definitely takes very deep consideration for security, as well as there has been moments where there was armed security or armed police officers on the school premises because of certain situations. I'm not going to dive too deep into those. For the most part, it comes down to is I wasn't concerned my child was safe because he was in a locked building with armed police outside the building. I was not worried. The only thing that sucked was standing there for about 2.5 hours waiting for my son to be released from school. Oh well, it's an inconvenience, but my son was safe. Now, the next thing that needs to be said here is, he went into the school then. I'm not sure where the armed security guard was at that point in time. They did have an armed security guard on premise because actually that is the person that shot the shooter. He actually killed the shooter. Good for him. He did a good job. It's just too bad he wasn't quicker. Now, this is where my argument comes in about we need to start letting teachers allowed to carry firearms in schools. May they have to have an unlocked box or a safe in the room, or even if they have to carry it on their person. I'm not 100% sure really how to go about that. And the problem is that kind of situation is going to be different everywhere. In my state, teacher probably could walk around with a gun on his hip and nobody, probably wouldn't be a problem. But even in a locked desk drawer would be better than nothing. If the teacher, so the shooter then went to a classroom Okay. And he went in, entered the classroom, and then opened fired on the class of children and a teacher. If that teacher was armed, it would have been a wrong classroom motherfucker moment because they would have been ready for him. More than likely, they already knew that he was coming, considering he was using an AR-15, which is an exception, not the rule. Let's be perfectly clear on this, that is an exception, not the rule. That is definitely not the common thing to happen in a mass shooting. But essentially, that teacher could have protected her classroom if she would have been armed. And the fact that it's Texas, probably actually more likely a gun owner, or at least her husband is. So I would definitely argue that, either the schools need more armed security guards, because apparently this school only had one, or they need to start allowing teachers and faculty to concealed carry in the schools. Because essentially when it comes right down to it at the end of the day, if something major does happen, and it's going to happen again because, well, I'll get into that in a bit here too. It comes right down to that's the front line defense. And also, that being said, if you stop this whole gun-free zone shit, or even limit who can have guns on the premise, a shooter is going to think twice before going to there. A perfect example is the Pulse nightclub shooter. He went to 3 different locations that night, found out that those places had armed security, and ended up going to the Pulse nightclub because it was a gun-free zone. And once again, we had a mass shooting that was done with Glocks. It was actually 2 Glocks to be exact. And I don't want to get into Sandy Hook because the Sandy Hook shooter, even though the Sandy Hook shooter had an AR-15, most of the shooting was actually done with a Glock. Sorry, folks. That's just how it is for you Glock fanboys out there. I'm sorry to shit on your parade, but so at the end of the day, what else can be done to prevent this? Well, people need to start taking more responsibility. There seems to be a lot of laxed responsibility in general, and this starts from children up to adults. You just had a situation here recently. I heard about, can't remember the name, rapper in New York. I guess he was arrested when he was 15 for illegally possessing a firearm, and he was arrested again recently for illegally possessing a firearm, as well as the firearm he had discharged when him and the cop were wrestling. And the charges were dropped. Folks, there needs to be some fucking blame right there. Okay? Nobody's taking responsibility for anything anymore. It's a lot of, it's someone else's fault. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. Or I didn't make the call. Or there was nothing I could do about it. No, there's something you can do about it. You can take responsibility for yourself. You really need to. And parents in general needs to take more responsibility. I'm sorry, but every one of these mass shooters that you hear about, especially with the school shooters, these are kids from from broken families, broken homes. They're abused and they're bullied when they're in school. Let's acknowledge what the problem is. And it starts with the family, realistically. And it starts with the fact that he probably didn't have really any responsibility, and let alone the people that were responsible for him, they weren't keeping very close tabs on him. So that's kind of an issue too. That's actually probably one of the bigger issues here that people is ignoring, is that there is definitely problems with these children that are committing these mass shootings. And it seems to be really quick and easy to blame the gun and the AR-15 and this, that, and the other thing instead of actually blaming the shooter. You need to blame the shooter. And That's just is what it is. You have to blame the shooters. The next thing that would help stop all this, stop publicizing it. Fine, talk about the shooter, talk about the shooting, talk about the victims. Don't talk about the shooter. Just acknowledge shooter as the shooter, or as the perpetrator, or the criminal, or whatever. This 15 minutes of fame stuff. Every time there's a mass shooting, that person gets 15 minutes of fame. And that's probably more likely the only way they're going to get 15 minutes of fame, looking at the mass majority of them. There's other countries too. I believe it's either Norway or, no, it can't be Sweden. I'm pretty sure it's Norway. But whenever they have a shooting or a crime, they do not list the perpetrator's name. That is kept quiet. Even though they do acknowledge the crime, the victims, and etc., they keep the criminal away from it. So that takes away the fame factor, if you will. People also, general, and we all can be a bit more diligent about this. Look at warning signs. There was people that everybody talked about how this guy had antisocial behavior. He had family members that did not even know what the hell was going on. I guess his grandfather today, I saw an article that his grandfather said they didn't even know he bought those guns. So, we need to be more diligent about this stuff, as well as be more diligent about the warning signs. This guy's posting pictures on Instagram, and there's differences. There's differences between someone, I'm not sure how to put it, but there's a lot of differences between someone who's very open and proud of what they're going to do versus someone who's very closed about what they're going to do. I talk all the time with my coworkers. All my coworkers are gun owners, by the way. And we always talk about different things such as, I'm going to go out to the range today. And sometimes my other coworkers will talk about when they go out to the range. So, it's kind of a regular thing to talk about firearms among my coworkers. My coworkers, my boss has mentioned about how he's got a collection of Ithaca M37s because he's a big fan of the Ithaca M37. If I recall correctly, he's trying to find one now in 16 gauge, which is kind of a harder caliber to find, or maybe it was 28 gauge. I can't quite remember what gauge he said. But the fact is, you got a guy posting pictures on Instagram, and I've actually posted videos of my firearms and doing reviews for my firearms, and there's a difference there. I'm open about it. I talk about the firearm. I do the review on the firearm, where this guy, he's posting pictures, and he's being really secret squirrel about it, even though, I don't know how to put it, but there's definitely red flags here. And probably the biggest one is the antisocial behavior. Every mass shooter that I'm aware of, antisocial behavior has been part of the thing, which kind of indicates to me that there was something wrong with this guy before he did what he did, and no one really took notice to it. Or if they took notice to it, they just decide to keep their mouth shut. Maybe it's time that when you take notice of something, you say something to somebody, to a guidance counselor, to a parent, to a principal, whatever. So, this could have been 100% prevented. It's not the AR-15's fault. It's a person problem. As I revert back to hammers and knives kill more people than guns do. And that's guns in general, not just AR-15s. Because actually, if you really narrow the gun statistics down to just AR-15s, you will find that it's a very, very, very small number of AR-15 related crimes. I can't remember. I don't even think it's 1%. It's something like 0.7% of the gun crime is committed with an AR-15. So that's actually a really small amount. Or it might be, maybe it's 2.7. I can't recall the number. It's just really, really small. And it's definitely much smaller than the media tries to push or the government tries to push. I mean, they think they're so focused on the AR-15s, and it's like, but pistols, asshole. I mean, one more thing out there too, and we're going to revert back to having armed security. And I've talked with the anti-gun people about this, and I've gotten in various debates about this. And there's always that, well, what about having armed security? Well, no, we can't have guns on school grounds. Okay, I know that's what the sign says, but why not have armed security? You have armed security to protect the president. You have armed security to protect your money in the bank. Actually, there's a long list of things that is protected with guns. Look at all that. And then all we get a sign, all we do to defend our kids is a warning sign. Are you serious? Seriously. I think it's time for a change, a serious change. And I don't think placing any more regulations on guns is going to do it. Understand that some of the gun there's quite a few mass shootings that happened when the AR-15 was actually banned. Folks, it's not the AR-15. It's a mental health problem. It's a people problem. And we need, as a country, we need to acknowledge that is the exact problem. And we need to come up with solutions to fix the problem. And honestly, we need to force the government to come up with solutions to fix the problem. Because honestly, the government will not come up with a solution for this problem. They will keep doing what they are doing, which is bickering back and forth on what to do. And at the end of the day, the gun-free zone signs will stay up. And sooner or later, it will happen again because nothing's changed. We need to look at the mental health problem. This country's had a mental health crisis, a growing mental health crisis, since I believe it was the 70s, is when they started shutting down a lot of the mental institutions. And we need to make it more accessible for people to get help that needs the help. And we need to make sure that people are more open about getting help if they need help. This child definitely needed help. The shooter definitely needed help. People recognized that there was something going on and did nothing. So, to be honest, those people are just as much blame as the shooter is, because they acknowledged that something was off and they never said a word. I'm just going to leave it at that. You want to protect kids? Get rid of gun-free zones. Get more armed security. Anyway, folks, thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video and have yourself a wonderful day.